The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Melania Trump's Manhattan apartment, casting a warm glow on the carefully curated space. She sat composed, her smartphone in hand, reading the email from Jack Reynolds' production team for the third time. The invitation to America Tonight wasn't just another media request. It was a calculated challenge. Her chief communications advisor, Jennifer Hartley, sat across from her, her expression a mixture of concern and professional worry. "Are you sure about this, Melania?" she asked, her fingers nervously tapping a leather portfolio. Melania set down her phone, her eyes reflecting a quiet determination that had defined her entire life. From her childhood in Slovenia to her journey through the modeling world, to becoming the First Lady of the United States, she had always understood the power of silence and the strength of calculated words. "Jack Reynolds wants a spectacle," she said softly, her accent still carrying the melodic tones of her European roots. "But spectacles are not conversations. They are performances." Jennifer leaned forward. The research they'd compiled on Reynolds was extensive. He was known for his razor-sharp political commentary and particularly aggressive interviews. His show had a reputation for creating viral moments by pushing guests to emotional breaking points. Most politicians and public figures avoided him. But Melania was not most people. Her mind drifted to Barron, now a young adult navigating his own path. The media had not always been kind to her son, treating him as a political prop, or worse, a target. This interview could be an opportunity to reclaim a narrative that had often been written without their consent. "I will do the interview," Melania declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But on my terms." She walked to her study, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. Her preparation was methodical, a trait she'd learned from her background in design and her years in the public eye. Each potential question would be anticipated, each potential attack considered and neutralized, not through aggression, but through intelligent, measured response. Jennifer watched her, a mix of admiration and apprehension crossing her face. "Reynolds won't make this easy," she warned. Melania's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible. "Ease was never the point," she replied. As the New York City traffic hummed outside, Melania began to outline her strategy. This wasn't just an interview. This was an opportunity to demonstrate something profound about grace, resilience, and the power of maintaining one's dignity in the face of provocation. Little did Jack Reynolds know, but he was about to encounter a form of strength he had never anticipated. The studios of America Tonight buzzed with an electric tension that morning. Jack Reynolds arrived early, his tailored gray suit a stark contrast to the nervous energy of his production team. He spread several thick manila folders across the conference room table, each one meticulously labeled with different aspects of the Trump family history. Sarah Chen, the show's senior producer, watched him with a growing sense of unease. She had worked with Jack for 7 years and knew his reputation for pushing boundaries, but this felt different. The files before him seemed more personal, more calculated than usual. "Jack," she interrupted, "are you sure about this approach?" He looked up, his steel-gray eyes holding a mixture of professional determination and something darker. "Melania Trump has been an enigma," he said, shuffling through news clippings and opposition research. "She's always been the perfect picture of composure. But everyone has a breaking point." The research team had been working overtime. They'd compiled everything from Melania's immigration history to Barron's school records, from Donald Trump's political controversies to family dynamics. Jack was determined to create a moment that would dominate news cycles for weeks. In another part of the studio, the makeup and wardrobe team prepared for Melania's arrival. Maria Rodriguez, the lead stylist, carefully selected a slate blue Dolce & Gabbana blazer, a choice that spoke of professionalism and subtle defiance. "She always dresses like she's going into battle," Maria remarked to her assistant, "but with elegance." The green room was prepared with meticulous attention to detail. Fresh water, a selection of herbal teas, and a carefully curated seating arrangement that was both welcoming and subtly confrontational. Every element was designed to put Melania slightly off balance. Meanwhile, Melania's team had arrived. Jennifer Hartley walked through the studio with the precision of a military strategist, checking every potential camera angle, every potential point of vulnerability. She knew Jack Reynolds' reputation for creating television moments that were more ambush than interview. As the final preparations were made, Jack Reynolds reviewed his key questions. They weren't just questions. They were carefully crafted psychological probes designed to expose, to challenge, to potentially humiliate. Questions about Donald Trump's political legacy, about Barron's education, about her own immigrant experience. Each one was a potential minefield. "She won't see this coming," Jack muttered to himself, arranging his notes with a predatory smile. Little did he know, Melania Trump was never someone who could be easily cornered. Her entire life had been a masterclass in navigating complex, challenging environments. From the runways of Milan to the halls of the White House, she had learned to turn potential vulnerabilities into moments of strength. The studio clock ticked closer to the interview time. Tension mounted. Jack Reynolds believed he was preparing for an interview. Melania was preparing for something else entirely. The studio lights were harsh and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows across Jack Reynolds' increasingly frustrated face. Melania sat opposite him, her posture perfect, hands folded elegantly in her lap. The first 15 minutes of the interview had been a carefully choreographed dance of subtle provocation and measured response. Reynolds leaned forward, his voice taking on a pointed edge. "Mrs. Trump, let's talk about your husband's presidency. Many Americans believe it was a period of unprecedented division." Melania's eyes never wavered. "Division is often a reflection of how we choose to listen," she responded, her accent adding a musical quality to her words that somehow made the statement more powerful. But Jack was just warming up. He knew his audience wanted more. His next questions became increasingly personal, targeting not just Donald Trump's political legacy, but the family's personal dynamics. When he mentioned Barron, his tone shifted, becoming deliberately dismissive, implying the young man was somehow a product of his father's controversial public persona. "Your son has largely stayed out of the public eye," Reynolds said, his voice dripping with barely concealed condescension. "Some might say he's been sheltered from the real world. How do you respond to critics who suggest he's been isolated by your family's unique circumstances?" The studio went silent. The camera operators, typically focused on their technical tasks, found themselves watching Melania intently. Jennifer Hartley, standing just off camera, held her breath. Melania's response would come, but not in the way anyone expected. She took a moment, not a defensive pause, but a calculated breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere deep within her. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of lived experience. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "you speak about isolation as if it's a weakness, but isolation can also be protection. Protection from judgment, protection from the very type of public dissection you're attempting to create right now. She continued, her words precise and measured. My son has navigated extraordinary circumstances with grace. He has watched his father serve as President of the United States, endured unprecedented media scrutiny, and maintained his dignity. That is not isolation. That is resilience. Jack Reynolds had prepared for anger. He had prepared for defensiveness. What he hadn't prepared for was this, a response that was at once a shield for her son and a surgical deconstruction of his own approach. Every young person, Melania said, her eyes locked with Reynolds's, deserves the right to discover themselves away from the glare of cameras. Barron is not a political statement. He is a human being, and he deserves the respect that all young people deserve. The studio felt electric. The cameras kept rolling, but something had shifted. What was meant to be an ambush had transformed into a moment of profound maternal protection and eloquent communication. Jennifer Hartley, watching from the sidelines, allowed herself the slightest smile. This was why they had come, not to fight, but to illuminate. Jack Reynolds, for the first time that day, looked genuinely unsettled. His prepared narrative was crumbling, replaced by something he hadn't anticipated: genuine, powerful human connection. The aftermath of the interview was nothing short of a media tsunami. Within hours, clips of Melania's response had been viewed over 50 million times across various social media platforms. Major news networks ran analysis segments, with commentators from both political spectrums struggling to categorize the interview. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more nuanced. In the quiet of her Manhattan apartment, Melania watched the coverage with Jennifer Hartley by her side. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from unexpected supporters. A prominent liberal columnist tweeted that Melania had redefined maternal grace. A conservative talk show host praised her extraordinary composure. Jack Reynolds's world, meanwhile, was unraveling. The network suspended him pending an internal review. Emails and social media messages flooded the studio, most condemning his approach. His producers, who had initially supported his confrontational style, now distanced themselves. They wanted a spectacle, Melania said softly to Jennifer, but they received a lesson. Barron, who had been studying at his university, called her that evening. "Mom," he said, his voice a mixture of pride and appreciation. "Are you okay?" "Always," she responded, her accent warm with maternal affection. The interview became more than a media moment. It transformed into a case study in communication departments across universities. Professors used it to teach students about media strategy, emotional intelligence, and the power of measured response. What struck most observers was the complete absence of bitterness in Melania's approach. She hadn't attacked. She hadn't defended through aggression. She had simply illuminated. Sarah Chen, the senior producer who had initially been uncomfortable with Reynolds's approach, resigned from the network. In her public statement, she praised Melania's dignity and criticized the network's toxic interview culture. Weeks later, Melania received an invitation to speak at a media ethics conference. Her topic: dignity in the age of provocation. The irony wasn't lost on her. The interview that was meant to tear her down had elevated her platform. In her study, surrounded by carefully curated mementos of her extraordinary journey, from a small town in Slovenia to the global stage, Melania reflected on the power of silence, of strategic communication, of maintaining one's core dignity regardless of external pressures. The interview with Jack Reynolds would be remembered not for its confrontation, but for its profound lesson in human respect. As New York City's lights twinkled outside her window, Melania Trump smiled, a quiet, knowing smile of someone who understands that true strength is never about winning, but about illuminating.